I'll be right back.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi, I'm trying to get back on. I'm having trouble.
You're
I
here.
was on and all of a sudden went off. I don't know.
Try to close out and come back on.
I think I'll have to do that, which is a pain in the neck, but I'll do it.
I had that last night for a meeting.
Okay, I'm going off. I'll try. Here I am.
You're
What
you're good.
happened there? I don't know what happened. There, I'm here. Yay.
Oh, the mysteries of Zoom.
Yeah.
You are, yeah.
So how is everybody today?
Good. Fine, it's getting warm. Well, I don't see the rain.
What?
Oh,
I hear you.
Julie,
I can't hear you. I don't know
lost-
what.
See, I just lost here. Okay.
What?
Mine went out. Let me see what's going on. There we go.
I don't know.
All right.
Alex is
Having
playing with the
trouble.
wires.
Hi, Babette.
Hi, Rabbi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We hear you.
Yes.
I
we do.
hear you.
Where are you? I don't see the red. There's it.
Okay, Rabbi, I'm making. you
Mess that is my desk. Oh. Where's Bet? There's Bet.
I just get a Kleenex. My eyes are tearing this morning.
Allergies are terrible. I was out
Well,
yesterday.
that's what
See
it
the
is. I
pollen.
opened the door.
You can see it in the air. You don't even, it's just awful.
My eyes are just tearing away.
Okay,
Okay.
you about ready to start?
Yep.
Okay, again, always remember to be respectful of others and don't hide yourselves. Make sure we see your smiling faces and mute yourselves if you're not speaking. Let us begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu b'zot v'vrei kol. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the world, who has sanctified us with your commandments, commanded to engage in the words of Torah. Amen. Okay, Rabbi.
So today we are dealing with Parshat Metzora, which you can find the Sin of Slandering Others beginning on page 124. This was actually my sermon from this past week. If you were there this past Friday, you heard a little bit about this. The overall purpose here is to try to derive some meaning out of all of these laws of leprosy and skin disease and purity and impurity, which in the book of Leviticus can appear to be very, very technical. And so Harvey Fields moves it in the direction of what's all the point? The point is about not to slander others. So opening some short comments, Minya and then Miriam. Miriam, I met your grandson's wife a few days ago. Jessie Lynn, who works for the Jewish Free Loan. You can't hear me.
He's also muted, yeah.
Got to unmute, Miriam.
All right, Minya.
I just had a question. How many wives did Moses have?
There's a rule in public affairs not to question people about their private lives.
Okay.
Just saw some celebrity on TV saying that he doesn't discuss his private relationships. Moses also was a believer in that, but presumably one. Why would you ask?
Because in the reading, it said that Moses was questioned about his marriage to a Cushite woman.
Okay. And so this brings up a problem which we find in the text periodically, that when you're integrating multiple texts into the same, final source, you sometimes have some problems. So in one source, apparently, Moses is married to a particular woman, and in another source, he's married to appears to be a different woman. The rabbis are obviously just going to reconcile this by saying that it's just different names and that there's references in both places are to the same person. And some of them will say that Cushite means a black African woman, and others will not, depending on which source you would take as being prominent. But in reality, they're different sources. So neither source is actually saying that Moses had more than one wife, although that wouldn't have been not allowed, in those times. But it was still very unusual and, not the general rule. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Do you want to follow it up with another question? No.
Not right now.
If Moses was married to more than one woman, would that affect anything? Not really. Okay. Okay, Miriam.
I was going to say that was Jessie Lynn, my granddaughter, and she is a doll.
Yes. Faye and I had breakfast with her and with her colleague from the Jewish Free Loan Association, and they will give loans to people in our congregation if they like. These are interest-free loans. They'll also lend in Jewish institutions. They're currently loaning about $2 million to various individuals and institutions. So they do a lot of very good work in the.
Yes, they do. And she's talking to a lot of people now about it. So let's hope it works.
And very, very charming woman.
Yes, she's really, even to the family, she's such an asset. She's such a very calm individual. And her baby is exactly the same, very calm. Okay, I don't understand something, even for them to think this. They said that in the Parsha that his hand was white. Moses had a skin disorder. And it was because he got the skin disorder because he couldn't get the people to listen to God. I don't understand quite why they would do that.
Why God would do that?
No, why they would even think about saying he got the skin disease because he couldn't get the people to listen to God.
It's a very high standard. So as Harvey Fields is framing this, the skin disorders are a question of not doing something right. In the case of Moses.
But according to them, they do say that you did something wrong and God is is not interested in you, and you got the skin disease. All throughout, it's got that feeling.
So I think in this particular case, the expectations on Moses are very high, and the rabbis felt that not only was he obligated to behave well, but he was tasked with the responsibility of getting other people, of convincing other people to go along with things. And his failure to do that, at least in that interpretation, is seen as a personal failure, and therefore he might get this skin rash. Do you have a better?
They said his hand was as white.
Oh, okay. So,
Whatever it was.
which was seen as a negative.
So it just, I couldn't understand even at that time, because they were intelligent, and to even say things like that.
Well, it's they're trying to. It's a metaphor for leadership failure. I don't take it too literally.
Okay.
Bernie.
All right, let me be the cynic here for a minute. Here's how I view this happening. We need to keep the people in line. So every time somebody gets a disease, we say, well, God got you for that. And so next time, behave better. But thinking a little deeper, I'm sure that they were living in a time when skin diseases were prevalent, and they needed an explanation for it. But I'm wondering how many people got skin diseases who never did anything wrong.
Well, I guess in those times, if you got a skin disease, you had done something wrong by definition. So.
But to me, it's like the Salem witch trials.
All right. So primitive religion is not going to operate on the same assumptions as rational religion. And so we just have to accept that that if your skin turned, ashen or something, that you were guilty. And this was a way to structure society. It wasn't a rational way. It wasn't the way we would do it, but that's what they did. They had to do something, and they didn't have the science to, they couldn't develop the system that you and Miriam would probably like, because they simply didn't have the scientific knowledge or the technological advancements.
And conversely, one wonders how many guilty people did not get sick.
But at least they had a way to structure society.
I understand that the whole thing here is they didn't understand it, so they needed an explanation.
And they needed a way to deal with people and to keep people in line. And the fact that people would know, if I do something wrong, my skin may turn white, and then I may have to be segregated or something. It did a lot to keep people from misbehaving. Now, of course, as you both point out, this didn't work very well, but apparently worked well enough to keep people basically conforming to the standard set. So they did the best they could, and the story with Moses, I think that there is a sense in leadership that you can do everything right, but if you don't lead your community in a way that is productive, then you have failed. And you can go over it and with a strategic planning expert and say, well, I did this and I did this and I did this. And they said, those are all the right steps. But if you can't get the people to do it, then you're a failure. And that, I think, is what, Moses is feeling, perhaps. Riva.
Reva, you need to
Unmute.
unmute.
All right.
There you go.
We looked at this a couple days ago also on Hot Topics in the Bible. And I came away with the sense that it doesn't say a whole lot about skin diseases. They didn't understand what they were. They didn't understand the cause of them, none of that. But what's really interesting is how they define bad behavior. You know, there's a lot of detail about what they consider bad behavior that's punishable. And I found that very interesting. And that follows pretty quickly in the reading.
Okay, let's start the reading and see how we go. Thank you, Reva. Babette, good morning, Babette.
Good morning.
Would you like to start us off?
Okay. Perek, the sin of slandering others.
Exactly.
As we have already noted, the Torah and its interpreters present neither a medical diagnosis nor treatment for the skin disorders of their times. While the ancient priests examined infections on the body or fungi in the home, they did not prescribe any medicine or therapy for healing. They did determine a period of quarantine, which may have been unrelated to the fear of passing the infection from one person to another. Instead, the isolation of the infected person seems to grow out of concern for guarding the community against people who were unclean or impure because of some wrongdoing. It is for that reason that the offering brought by a person who has been cured of a skin disease or whose home has been infected is called a sin offering. The rituals of the offering in the sanctuary are meant to celebrate purification, the end of being considered unclean. All such wrongdoings that cause infection are forgiven through the sacrifices and offerings brought to the priest at the sanctuary. Many commentators ask, what was the wrongdoing or the sin that brought on such serious infections and promoted the emergency procedure of quarantine? In answering the question, interpreters focus attention upon the record of major biblical personalities who are said to have been afflicted with tzaraut or skin disorders. Rashi, for example, points out that Moses suffered from a serious skin disease after he complained to God that the people of Israel would not listen to him. Because he implied that the people refused to follow God's commandments, Moses was punished. The Torah says that his hand became infected as white as snow.
Okay, thank you, Babette. Comments? Sai or B or Bill or Marcia? We can't see you, Bill. Okay, B.
Well, what I'm thinking of is not everyone who was at Hot Topics yesterday.
Now we can see you, Bill. Thank you, Bill, and I like your shirt.
But Ann Barris made some very interesting comments about the Torah, which brings to mind today. The question is, why do we read portions that bear no meaning to us today? And I think here, maybe the meaning is, what are the transgressions against God, not how do you treat skin diseases?
Exactly.
But I'm not sure.
It was, thank you, B. It was very interesting yesterday. I was rather caught off guard by the level of anger expressed by most of the group, who were mostly women, about how they had been treated in American society and possibly in Jewish circles as well over the course of their lifetimes, and particularly maybe early in their lifetimes. You know, they felt they'd been discriminated against and that they hadn't been given opportunities and they'd been condescended to and so forth and so on. And the level of anger and emotion, even now, in some cases, 40 or 50 years after these events, was really remarkable. And Ann Burris also made some interesting points that if there's parts in the Torah that do not reflect her values, what is the value of those parts? And, you know, for me, it's all interesting. I don't expect to find in the Torah anything necessarily to confirm my values. If I do, it's good. If I don't, I still find it interesting. But Anne was not of that way of thinking. For her, the value of the text is to find things that reflect on her values. If it's totally opposite and totally primitive and you know, opposite to what she feels is important, then she has no interest or desire in studying it. And quite the contrary, she felt it's something negative that should be avoided. So it was a very interesting discussion back and forth. B, do you want to reframe your question for us today?
Well, the question is, and I'm referring a little bit to what Ann said, this portion doesn't seem relevant to us today. How
A
is
lot of
it
portions don't.
right? How do we I respect the Torah because it's our history. Do we need to read every portion of the Torah is the main question.
All right, and there's two strategies. The Ann Burris approach would be to skip sections which are not consistent with our values, and just to pick the quote-unquote greatest hits of the Torah, you know, justice shall you pursue, and things like that, the parts that are inspiring and that are consistent with our values today. Part two is my approach. You study everything just because it's interesting and because it gives you a perspective on ancient Judaism, whether or not we like it, you know, and there might be approach 3 or 4 or 5, which might be something else. Marcia, you want to comment on this question?
I think that you, as you were speaking, you were saying what I was thinking, is that, that I wanted to say, is that you read it not because it's relevant to our times. 2,000 years or more have gone by. It's not going to be the same. 5,000? How many years? I don't know. But it gives us a picture into the times and how people thought at that time. And it's not a negative thing to know that. You just have to accept it as in the context of when it was written and what they're trying to say.
Right,
Take it personally.
and Marcia, you and I like that approach, but some people find that ridiculous. Bill and then Ray.
Okay, I'm one of the other people who find this part of the Torah problematic. My picture disappeared here.
Oh, you just went sideways.
Okay. Yeah, although I think leprosy is a suitable punishment for gossip, we know that when people get sick, it's not a punishment. There's something else that bothers me, and that is it gives us a picture of a vengeful God. We're explaining our ailments, we're explaining our difficulties by the wrath of God. And it seems to me that goes against a picture of a loving God. Here is God giving us punishment for our sickness. I find that somewhat discordant as well.
And this is exactly the truth, that in the Bible there's different views of God, and many of the views of God are not views that many of us might ascribe to today. In this case, as Bill puts it, a vengeful God who is kind of overdoing the punishments in some cases, or being really strict, and almost seems to, enjoy the process of punishment. And so most of us would want, God that is much more above that and is compassionate and loving, even at the expense of not, being, not exacting punishment for even things that are serious, and certainly not for things that are not so serious. So, and so we're faced with a God who seems to feel things and behave in ways that we don't really want to identify with God. So that's another reason to just skip these sections. So, and I guess we could come up with a Torah commentary that skips all the unpleasant stuff. That's only positive things. And but after a while, we might feel that our religion's a little too goody-goody, and how can it be so positive about everything when we hear from outside sources that there's a lot of material in the Torah that's not so good? So, I guess it depends what we want. Okay, who is next? Ray, and then Riva, and then Minya.
I have 2 points. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The first is that it's valuable to talk about gossiping and blackballing people without cause, things of that sort, because this is a very common act. In fact, on the high holy days, these reactions are one that I remember the old ladies pounding themselves because you can be sure they gossiped. On the other hand, I think it is very valuable to see the reactions from the past. And one of them is the fear of God. And when you talk about the possibility of being punished because you're talking uncontrollably, that could have been a way to control gossip then and now. But the idea of not studying this, I think, is a little sad. I think that the contrast between then and now helps us understand what we should be doing better than if we didn't read this. Where in what other activity in our lives would we stop and make a big deal about slander and gossip?
So your point here is that that this is not irrelevant or antiquated, but it's making a very serious and contemporary point that you should not slander. And we don't need to take the leprosy part of it too literally, but if you just don't take that too seriously, the main point is extremely relevant.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're on the other side of this argument. Okay, Riva, Minya, Sai, Miriam, in that order. Sorry, first or first.
Okay. I strongly agree with Ray. I think there are gems within this. These are not mostly the 10 commandments, but they're really important issues in terms of how we behave, how we treat one another. And so I think that part of the content is wonderfully valuable and worthwhile. And some of the material we know we can't view literally, or at least for many of us, we don't see it as literal. But I think within here, when it talks about the importance of good behavior and not lashon hara, not saying cruel and hurtful and dishonest things about other people, is valuable. And I think that's a real contribution to to society even now. I mean, we need to teach our children that also. We need to teach those people around us these ways of good behavior and not, reinforce people who like to gossip.
So you support Ray. Do you
Yes.
think the leprosy part of the parsha is worth reading?
You read it and you focus on, I think, those elements that really are valuable. And I think we float by some of the pieces that seem much less relevant.
Okay, who is next? Minya, Sai, Miriam, and then Dee.
I just want to create, I have an analogy that works for me, which is, this is like joining a book club. When you go to a book club, sometimes they pick books that you're not crazy about, but you end up reading them anyway, and you find that there's value to why that book was chosen. If we pick parshas only by what are pleasant, then we're never going to learn about things that are maybe not so pleasant or that we don't agree with. So I think doing it the way we do, which is to read the parshas that you choose, we're learning something from it.
So you're in favor of the whole kit and caboodle?
Yes, I always like to learn new things.
Okay, and even if those things aren't directly relevant to today,
Yes.
it's okay.
Okay, and I have to go check my cake in the oven, so I'll be back.
I think Sai, Miriam, and Dee is in that order, right? Okay, Sai.
I like to think that the people of 2,000 years ago were just as smart as we are. They certainly didn't have the book learning, but I'm sure they had the same common sense. And so when they got involved in situations such as skin lesions and God punishment and so forth, they were smart enough to figure out what was true for them and what was untrue. Now, for those who figured it out that it was untrue from their point of view, they started to separate themselves to some degree from the basic religion, whereas the others became more involved and more engrossed in the religion. And if you look around today, that's exactly what you have. That's how Reform religion came about. We don't believe in a lot of the things that the Bible says compared to what the Orthodox do. And that's very basic, and that goes on all the time.
So which side are you on, Sai?
I'm pretty off to the left.
So you think if it's not relevant to today, we should skip it, or if it's not relevant today, it's interesting
I
and
want to be able to think about it, not just accept it as it being so, and make my own mind up on the situation. And if I feel it's not for me, and unfortunately that pushes me away from the orthodoxy of certain groups and makes me less of a believer as compared to them.
But let's say there's 3 or 4 weeks in a row of stuff that is interesting but not relevant to our lives today. Is that worth studying?
Well, the relevancy is how you ascertain it. It was written in the book as part of the way a group of people lived, and the fact that you don't want to accept it today, that's fine. But there
All right, I think you're on the right on this particular question, Sai, much as you might hate to be there. I think, in this group, you're on the right. Miriam and then Dee.
I feel this is history. If you don't go back, then do away with all history.
Well, that's what a lot of modern society is doing, exactly that. Most of the younger people, they have no interest in anything historical because for them technology is everything. And not only what happened in 1348 is irrelevant, but what happened in 1948 is irrelevant. The only thing that counts is, technological innovations and what's going to happen today and tomorrow. And you see, with an attitude like that, they're not going to really find Judaism all that interesting. Okay, D and then B and then Marcia.
I think it's all relevant because when I look at today and I look at then, it's not much difference. People are as disconnected today as they were then. And we have a commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And so example, I think is very important, especially today, because people today are more disconnected than I've seen through my life. So I think it's all very relevant. I think that it's important for us to understand that where we're at today, if we push aside technology, we're not any much different than they were then. In a lot of ways, disconnection.
Okay, thank you, D. B.
I'm not necessarily in favor of deleting this section. I was playing the devil's advocate, but I feel like this section is not about skin diseases, it's about behavior.
Yeah.
And it's important for all of us to even be refreshed in this.
Mhm.
And as my parents say, you must be a good person. And I think from that aspect, it's quite relevant.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you, B. And over to Marcia.
Food, okay. I going back to D two comments ago, I'm sort of in the same track of her. I think if we look at the last several years in American society and world society, the slander and the untruths that are constantly being told just for gain of one sort or another have degraded our society, and we're not following these rules of the Bible. I don't care if it's Old or New Testament. I think they all probably reflect the same sort of feeling. And I think that's to the degradation of society. Maybe that's a reason the young people don't want to look at it, because they are so used to behaving unthinkingly and uncaringly with slamming people, for no reason. I think it makes a difference in society. I think looking at these anti-slander approaches, or they're not commandments, but rules of behavior, I think it's necessary for us to look at that. And I think you got to get past the leprosy and whatever else white scales he had on his hands, and just look at what it's trying to tell you. And that's the important part.
Mhm. Okay, Bill and then Ray.
Okay. It's my understanding there were several documents or several writings to choose from when the current Bible as we have it was constructed. I'm wondering why this section is in the canon. We've discussed all the problems with it. If you look how it's written, there's a different style. There's a different approach here to, let's say, Exodus, which gives us continuous history.
Right.
This is really getting into the weeds. They talk about the construction, the blueprints for the tabernacle, and what seems to be a lot of trivia.
Right.
I mean, wouldn't the Bible be just as well off if this book was not in there, or if something that maybe covered some of the laws was presented in a different way? I see a different voice, a different approach here, and I have to scratch my head why this is in the canon.
Well, and as you probably know, the biblical criticism argues that there were at least 4 major sources, and one of those sources was P, which P stands for priestly, and the priests were the Kohanim, and this section was presumably written by that group. And so Bill says, well, it would be better for the Torah if it wasn't in there. But he's thinking about the Torah as a modern book that people like us are reading. The thing is, the P editors or authors are the priests. What they're interested in is anything that's going to draw attention to the temple and the behavior of the priests. So from their point of view, the more material you have of this nature, even though it's very technical and seems to have no relevance, it is making the ritual done by the priests in the temple paramount. And for them, that was what was important. And if they could get people like us to read that and say, oh, the priests are important, and learn about what the priests are doing and what the priests are not doing and how the priests are doing it, for them, that's the main purpose of the Torah entirely. For Bill, the stuff in Exodus was just written by one of the other of the 3 editors. I'm not, depends which part and so forth, but it was not P, is much more engaging and important, but it was written by a different group for a very different purpose. Bill, does that give you a little bit of perspective? You knew what I just said, right?
Yes, no, I understand that. I still have the question why it was considered so important. I guess we had no choice. The priests made the decision for us, if I gather what your response is.
And when they edited it, we don't know, but it appears that the redactors did not choose from different materials and throw out a lot of material. They appeared to have taken most of the material they were given, and they tried to keep 99% of it. So they weren't taking large amounts of text and getting rid of them because it was boring. By that time, it was all regarded as important, and their job was to try to edit it together in a semi-coherent way. And so they apparently took out a few sentences here and there, but most of what they were given, they kept. Some of it may have been lost earlier, but they would not, as far as I know, we don't know who these people were, and we don't know much about the process, but as far as I know, they didn't just say, we're going to take out 3 chapters here and just leave it out.
Rabbi, there you are.
You are frozen both visually and in sound for a few moments. We can see you moving now. I don't know if we can hear you.
Apologies, I do have Cox Cable coming to my house tonight.
We hear you now.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, we'll go back to Babette to continue the reading.
You have raise hands up.
Ray.
I strongly agree, Marcia, that there is meaning in each of these things. The rashes are incidental in this. What is important is that teaching the power of gossip to do harm. The Talmud comments that the gossiper stands in Syria and kills in Rome. Where there is no wood, a fire goes out. Where there is no whisper, a quarrel dies down. Those are the important thoughts, that a gossip can hurt far beyond the silliness of it.
Rochelle, and then we're going on.
Good.
Okay, thank you for giving me a moment. I wonder if these aren't not real skin diseases. I mean, it's shame. What if these supposed skin diseases are just shame? Carrying your shame on the outside of your body where everyone can see that you have done wrong, whether you want to try to hide it or not. There is no hiding your wrongdoing. Like a skin rash, like something embarrassing, it will be on your sleeve. Everyone will be able to see your wrongdoings. There is no hiding it. I wonder if that's not what it is. That's just me. That's the way I look at it.
I mean, I like that. Whatever the original intent, I think that that is a very nice symbolic way to look at this, so that if you've done something bad in here, we haven't gotten to that yet, but you know, my argument Friday night was that what is really, really bad is when you deliberately go out to malign someone. So you don't like them for some reason, but it's not a reasonable reason, but you're going to destroy them by telling people stuff about them that is either not true or partially not true, or if it's true, it's not relevant. And you're trying to destroy their reputation and destroy their ability to function. And it's very easy to do. We see over and over that people who read Facebook or watch cable TV of what right wing or left wing, they very easily fall under a certain sway and they believe what they hear. And that's at least 35% of the population, and maybe much more. So, it's a very dangerous thing to do. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, back to you, Babette.
Okay. Earlier rabbinic tradition argues that Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, was stricken with a skin disease because she slandered her brothers by gossiping about their relationships with their wives. They are busy leading the people and make no time to spend at home. The rabbis accuse her of saying. They also point out that she embarrassed Moses publicly by questioning his marriage to a Cushite woman and by implying that she was as important a prophet as he was. For her gossip, slander, and public accusations, say the rabbis, Miriam was punished with a serious skin infection.
Oh boy, okay, stop there. So, wow. So, what do you make of this? Rochelle or Marcia?
Again, it's on the outside of her. Everybody knows what she's done. They know her wrongdoing, like a skin infection. Everybody can see it. She shall bear her shame.
But maybe the things she's saying are true.
Doesn't matter. She's only saying them. She's only saying these things, obviously, because she means to put a downfall on the people.
Okay, so you're saying her motives, but what if her motives, her brothers are working 18 hours a day, the wives and children are sitting at home completely abandoned? What if Miriam is saying, to her brothers, you have to spend some time with your children, and the brothers are refusing? And it's more exciting to be there at the tabernacle and interacting with God. And so then Miriam says, I'm going to tell everybody publicly because your wives and children are being neglected. What if there's a good motive? Does that change things?
That's not a good motive. I mean, it's a good motive, but that's something she discusses within the confines of her and her brothers, not something that the rest of the community
Let's
needs
say,
to know about.
let's say she did it already and they ignored her, or they told her to mind her own business, or they said, we're not listening to you.
Well, then that's what she needs to do. She cannot control the situation.
Oh, well,
By getting
all
everyone
right.
else involved, she's only doing it to bring harm and disrespect upon her brothers.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, Marcia, Bernie, and Cy in that order.
Okay. Well, maybe she broke out in a rash from aggravation after the rabbis got on her case about it. I don't know. But I think Rochelle had a good point. She should not have brought this into the public circle, you know. And but I don't know. I don't think it's it's kind of it's silly in a way, but I think they're trying to make a point. And I was angry here, and I don't know why. So I lost Zoom, and I had to come back in. And now whenever I say anything, there's a background sound. But I think it's just I'm going back to look at this for her gossip. Say the rabbis that she had a serious skin infection. This is just them saying she had a serious skin infection. How do we know she had a serious skin infection?
Oh, well, there's something in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, that refers to this. It's referenced there. We'd have to look up exactly what it says.
They must have lived near a lot of poison ivy is all I gotta say, but you know, but I think they're just trying to make a point on it. Well, I don't understand this. I'm saying that, but I understand them criticizing that she should not have been criticizing the Moses and Aaron, you know. And she's thinking a little bit too much of herself, I think, too, in this point.
Okay. Bernie, Cy, and Ray, and Riva,
Never mind.
and Minya.
Never mind.
Never mind. Okay. Bernie, Cy.
You know, I have difficulty considering that there's any factuality about this whole idea of punishment for doing something wrong, that there's a sign that God puts on you for doing something wrong. Because if you carry it through to the Holocaust and the sign that the Jews had on their clothing put on by the Nazis, the whole thing doesn't make much sense to me.
Ray, Riva, and Minya.
I'm thinking of my brother as a little boy who got poison ivy. And he thought he would be scolded because he had something on his leg. So he didn't say anything about it. He had scars from poison ivy on his legs the rest of his life. And this happened to be a real good schnook brother. He loved everybody. Teenagers are afflicted with pimples. You can't blame, well, they also gossip a lot. But just to say that because you have a skin appearance, I have suffered from psoriasis for years. In a swimming pool, you could see it on my back and arms. It has disappeared because of medication. There are too many reasons for such things to use it as if you see it on somebody nowadays, to think that they are being punished by God for some reason. That it should not be a modern concept. The thing that's important here is to realize that lies and slander and enlarging the truth has consequences. To me, that's what this portion is talking about, not about the punishment of the skin.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Riva, and then is it Ty or Riva, and then Minya?
Yep.
Again, I totally agree with Ray. I think there's two messages we're getting here. One is the importance of not having slander, arrogance, and meanness in your society. And I think the priests or whoever were first telling these stories, we're trying to get that message to the population because it's important things. They're values and virtues that really are very important to a society that behaves well, that functions well. The other side of this, and it's also been mentioned, is if you get sick, it's because God is punishing you. And that's the message we're all refuting. Because we know that's not how things work. Wonderful, good people get terrible problems and health issues and infants, etc. We don't believe now that we're being punished for many health conditions because of our behavior. Because many good people have bad things happening to them. I think we have to keep those two messages separate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Riva. Minya?
First, with a little humor, if you saw the 10 Commandments in the movies, then you know that Miriam did have leprosy because she was living in a leper colony. But my question is, that was supposed to be a joke. My question is, when did things change for Miriam that she actually became more of a prophet? Because don't we honor her on the Seder plate now with an orange?
Anyone want to answer that? Marcia?
I don't know.
Babette or Riva or Steve?
I think, well, actually, is it in retrospect when we look at her that we now honor her? People are not necessarily honored during their time.
Yes, that's why I asked, when did things change?
I don't know when.
Was it, not until contemporary times?
Well, clearly Moses's brother and sister were viewed more positively later than at the time. Aaron was involved in the golden calf and he wasn't executed for that. And Miriam was involved in this, and both of them, their reputations were very quickly rehabilitated.
Okay.
Well, this was not near as bad as the golden calf.
Correct. I mean, I would argue that she didn't do anything wrong, that all these things she's accused of are, legitimate, that she was just trying to watch out for her brother's wives, and that she was just pointing out certain things, and she may not have had any evil intent at all. And
she was probably right.
She was probably right, and she may have been motivated by good motivations. So I'm not convinced she was guilty of anything, really. But you can see how you can spin stuff in different ways. If we're saying that motivation is really the problem here, that if you say something about someone with the goal of really helping them or helping society, that's okay. If you say the same thing with the goal of hurting them or hurting society, that's bad. So, it's hard enough for us to figure out what actually happened, but when you're trying to figure out someone's motives, very difficult sometimes, especially if there's other people out there spinning the truth deliberately in a way to mislead. So it's not easy, but I tend to look at Miriam in a positive way. Okay, back to you, Babette.
Okay. Rabbi Yohanan, quoting Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, warns that spreading Lashon Hara, slander, lies, or misinformation is identical to denying the power of God. God commands honesty and the truth. If a person is dishonest, God's desire is undermined. Such a person, says Rabbi Yohanan, will be punished with skin infections. The talebearer is a cannibal, teaching the power of gossip to do harm. The Talmud comments that the gossiper stands in Syria and kills in Rome. I don't know what this feedback is that's going on. Okay. Have you heard something about someone? Let it die with you. Be of good courage. It will not harm you if it ends with you. Your friend has determined that your friend's friend has a friend, so be careful of what you say. Where there is no wood, a fire goes out. Where there is no whisper, a quarrel dies down.
Okay, thank you, Babette. And that last quote is from the book of Proverbs, which we haven't studied here. And maybe Riva and her adult education committee would like to put together a course on Proverbs. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes are two of the most interesting books in the Bible that are probably not studied as much as they should be. And that one's pretty obvious, right? If there's, you need enough wood to keep a fire going. And so similarly, you need a lot of people whispering around to keep gossip going. And that if people just resolve to not spread it, then it won't go very far. Again, I would differentiate between things that are not, have no evil intent and things that do. So to say that so-and-so changed her hair color, that may or may not have some slight negative tone to something, but that's very different than saying so-and-so's been stealing money, out of the treasury when you know that to be not the case. Any comments about any of these quotes? These are from different, from the Talmud, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and from the book of Proverbs, from different places. Rochelle.
Well, Ray has her hand up, so would Ray like to go? And
Ray?
then I can speak.
Ray, you're muted. She put her hand down.
Okay, Rochelle, why don't you go because we can't hear Ray.
Okay. Regarding the have you heard something about someone, let it die with you. Be of good courage. It will not harm you if it ends with you. This is something that resonates huge with me. When I was 6 years old, people were making fun of a cousin of mine. She was extremely overweight. At 6 years old, she was a very big girl. And she stayed that way her entire life until she got cancer. It passed. I heard people making fun of her on the bus. And I said, it's medically. She can't help that she looks like this. This got back to my cousin. And she never talked to me ever really again, because not only did they start making fun of her for her weight, then they started making fun of her because she couldn't lose any weight and she was always going to look like that. And even though I had good intent and I was trying to defend her, I put her in an even worse situation. And it to this day, I will always, she's passed, which is unfortunate, but I will always regret having done something like that. I really really, truly. Doesn't always work.
But if you were trying to defend her and you gave a reasonable justification, but it does show that people that are intent upon teasing or bullying will twist anything to, they can say anything they want, and if they say it in a teasing, mocking way, it doesn't really matter. So somebody's very smart, they'll say, oh, you're very smart, and they'll tease them in a negative way. So you can't win in such a situation, right? Because, it seems like no matter what Rochelle would have done or not done, it wasn't going to turn out well because these people were determined to mock this cousin. Sai.
We just read this. God commands honesty and truth. If a person is honest, God's desire is undermined. Now this bothers me. God's desire is undermined. That's a pretty big statement to apply to God. How do you honor God? It takes away the grandness of God by saying he's undermined. Don't you think?
Yeah, I guess so. So what would be your solution for this?
I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, if there is one.
There may not be one. And so if there is not one, then what, can you live with that?
This that bothers me. If God is going to be undermined because of the truth, then he's going to be undermined by a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sai. Okay, Babette, you can keep going.
Okay. At another time, Rabbi Samuel Bar Nahmani quoted Rabbi Yohanan argues that the serious skin infections mentioned by the Torah are the result of 7 kinds of wrongdoing: slander, bloodshed, perjury, adultery, arrogance, misappropriation, and meanness. Several examples are given. Joab is punished with skin disease because he murders Abner. Geshazi is infected because he lies to Nachman. Pharaoh is penalized because he takes Sarah away from her husband, Abraham. King Azariah is infected with skin disease because he seeks to appropriate the priesthood under his power. For the rabbis, all of these examples prove that Zarat is the result of wrong.
Again, my connection is unstable. Why?
Us that Moses Maimonides agrees. The great physician and Torah interpreter maintains that Zarat, skin disease, is not a natural phenomena, but rather a sign and wonder for the people of Israel to warn them against Lashon Hara, evil talk.
Okay, so stop there for a minute. So what Maimonides, who was a doctor and a rationalist, is saying that when the Bible talks about this, it's talking about something supernatural. It's not talking about the skin disease. So he's rejecting our original thesis that this is, just an explanation for why people were getting skin problems. He's saying, no, Tzara'at is not your normal pimples or poison ivy, anything like that. It was something specifically sent by God, specifically to show a sign that certain people had done something bad relating primarily to their slander of others. So if somebody wants to slander somebody and they go about doing it, and God sees this in the biblical times, wants to set an example, God sends a particular type of a skin rash that is not like any other rash. It's not like what they got just from the little bugs in the sand. And so it became very clear that this person is being punished for what they are doing in terms of evil talk, slander. So Maimonides is changing our whole assumption about what causes it. Sai and then Rochelle.
I want to get back. The question I have is, in the 10 Commandments, the original 10 Commandments, was there specific punishments if you broke any of them?
No.
Interesting. No.
So, yes, good point. So when we dealt with capital punishment in the course on Tuesday, which I don't think you're in that course, but we had capital punishment. It was our first week. And one of the things that the author said right away was the 10 Commandments was irrelevant to our discussion, because even though it prohibited murder as one of the commandments, it didn't prescribe any particular punishment. Therefore, if you're talking about whether capital punishment is allowed or not allowed in Judaism, it was not helping. Okay, who was next? Rochelle and then Marcia.
Again, the specific rash on the skin that God sent. We are imbued by God with emotions. And again, is this shame? Is this specific rash our actual shame, our regret that others can see of us? Like, I believe that's my punishment for doing what I did. Without intent, I will always carry this regret. Maybe that's it. Maybe the regret and the shame is my skin rash from God.
Okay. Marcia.
So in the Bible itself, there aren't many times where specific punishments are meted out. I know there's an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth somewhere in there, but there's no, otherwise I don't recall other punishments being, general punishments. Well, we had some people who got punished right on the spot, like who was it, Lot? He turned to a pillar of salt or something like that. But it's not usual. There are no prescribed punishments in general, are there?
Yes. In many cases, the punishments are listed. Remember that the Torah is different kinds of things and so forth. So, but there are many places, for example, capital punishment is prescribed for many things. So, but 10 Commandments, no. But elsewhere, not always, but many cases there is punishments listed. Marcia, do you want to follow that up?
No, I was just trying to remember at different points. Yes, in the 10 Commandments, no, of course, but I didn't remember. I guess when you think about it, there are different times where it comes up, but I didn't remember. Okay.
Okay, Babette, you want to read a little bit more?
Okay. Also, we have a phrase, bad things happen to good people, Sometimes people are punished terribly with diseases, and they were marvelous folks. So how do you explain that one?
Yeah, that's difficult.
Right. Obadiah Safrano enlarges upon Maimonides' observation, arguing that the quarantine ordered by the priest is meant to prompt a person to ask God's forgiveness for his or her sins. The quarantine is a time to reconsider one's actions, both the intentional and unintentional ones. In confronting one's shortcomings, honesty, scrutinizing one's treatment of others, there is a chance for personal improvement and repentance. In this way, the affliction of tzarat leads to isolation, which leads to repentance, which brings about God's forgiveness for wrongdoing and rehabilitation of each sinful human being. Something just occurred to me about, or people punished for the sins of the fathers, for instance.
Right.
They were perfectly good people, but, maybe their ancestors weren't,
Right.
so how's that rational?
That's a whole nother issue that is, we won't get into that right now, but, that's something the Bible talks about that modern society rejects. That if your parents, let's say, were very bad people, that you do not carry any responsibility for what they may have done. I think that's a function of modern thinking. And in the Bible, maybe not too clear. Other comments about this paragraph. This is Sforno. He's an Italian Jewish commentator on the Bible from 16th century.
There's a lot of punishment going around, What about rewards for
good?
Leading a marvelous life and a giving life and a productive life?
Yes, so that's, if Ann Burris was here, she would talk about how in a contemporary world, the emphasis should be much more on building positive character traits and not so much with punishments for alleged misdeeds. I would think, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that would be what she would say. Marcia?
I'm just getting back on again and my connection keeps freezing up and I going in and out. That's why I'm shaking my head.
Maybe this is punishment for Marcia's misdeeds.
I don't know what I said about anybody, but I'm losing Zoom.
My connection's not so good either. Maybe this is in the technological era. It's no longer skin rashes. It's unstable internet
Maybe
connection.
that's what the feedback's going on with that.
Yeah, the vengeance of Cox.
Is that what it is? Okay. I would believe that.
That Cox cable is becoming the arbiter of moral behavior.
Could well be.
The power to inflict punishment.
Well, that bill is enough punishment, so.
Okay, Minya? Steve? Okay, D.
You have to unmute D. Unmute.
Sorry. When we talk about all this disease, when we go on to Leibovitz, and this I can go with Surratt, is that it's all to teach the people and make them responsible, basically, for what they do, in society. Their slander, their gossip, however, whatever else sins they do. Because in my mind, I don't believe God punishes people for making a mistake. I can't wrap my head around that. And also, a lot of people get sick and got diseases then and now, and they're very good people. So to me, it's just setting an example of behavior and wanting people to live a Torah life the best they can.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, D. Any responses to that? B? Okay. Back to you, Babette.
The Hamel Leibovitz extends Sforno's logic in a different way. She quotes the Talmud's observation that the house affected by tzarat exists for the purpose of education. In other words, She says that the plague teaches us that society should take notice of the first sign of misconduct, however small. Just the same as a disease begins with hardly noticeable symptoms and can be stopped if detected in time. So a moral disease in society can be prevented from spreading if immediate steps are taken. Otherwise, it will spread throughout the community.
All right, comments? Miriam?
Unmute Miriam.
I said that I think it's true that I've lost my trend. They were intelligent enough to know that this was catching, that you could catch it from somebody and isolate. At least they knew that much. That's quite a feat.
Okay, so Miriam's going back to theory number one, that this is really a skin disease or a fungal disease, and that the interpretation is creative. Maimonides gives another view, which is that this is not a skin disease, that this was an act of God, and that this was.
You've just lost your sound, Rabbi.
We don't hear you.
Rabbi, we can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Cox did it again.
Take it off their bill.
Now
you're
we hear
back.
you.
I'm back again.
Rabbi.
You're back.
I think Cox decides when it doesn't want me to be able to speak, that I've obviously done many wrongdoings in my life that are punishable, and I'm getting all the punishment back in 1 month. Okay. Let's skip down to the bottom of 125, dangers of the tongue in the little box. Babette.
Dangers of the tongue. The book of Proverbs 18:21 teaches death and life are in the hands of the tongue. One who loves the tongue and uses it to speak words of Torah and commandments will be justly rewarded. But one who speaks slander brings upon himself much sorrow. Comment on Leviticus. A person may think, of what importance are my words? A word has no substance, neither can it be seen or touched. It is true that words have no substance, cannot be seen, but like the wind, they can cause entire worlds to crash.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The first quote there is from the Senorena. This is a very famous Yiddish commentary in Eastern Europe that was written by a male for females. Females in Eastern Europe generally could not read Hebrew, but they knew Yiddish. And so this was a popularized version of rabbinic thinking that emphasized stories and moral lessons for the supposedly more simple-minded females. And it was extremely popular for a long time.
Were there simple-minded males?
Well, the attitude there, and I was saying that in a facetious way, obviously, that the attitude there was that there was a tremendous difference between males and females. I guess they, and this is something that was talked about yesterday, that there was a belief in Jewish and non-Jewish society that men were capable of more abstract thought.
The intellectual difference, yeah.
And then the educational differences were enormous. So the results were that women needed something simpler, but this kind of attitude toward women is is long gone, fortunately, but it was very entrenched in Eastern Europe at the time. And so the Senorena is a very interesting book because it's a product of this terrible difference in how women were treated from men. On the other hand, it's a very interesting source of folk culture, because it wasn't as quote unquote academic. You learn a lot more about the lives of people because the author was trying to relate to women who were out in the working world, if you will, and not to keep it in a very abstract level. So then it says there, it quotes the book of Proverbs, and it says that life and death are determined by what we say or don't say. So slander can lead to death, basically.
Good.
Comments, responses. Okay, Babette, I guess we can move to the final two paragraphs on 126 as we have discovered.
Andrew Kelly.
Oh. Why is the punishment?
No, one more paragraph down after that.
Oh, as we have discovered, most commentators connect the skin infections and the outbreak of fungus on clothing or in homes with the sins of an evil tongue. While today we may reject the connection, seeing no medical evidence between such afflictions and what people say or do, Torah interpreters still leave us with much to consider. The spread of lies, gossip, slander, character assassination, derogatory statements, and fraudulent stories can infect society and destroy human lives. Drawing a parallel to the spread of contagious and dangerous disease, the commentators warn about the damage such as evil talk can bring to individuals and society. Learning to quarantine such evil and to cure ourselves from the temptations of Lishon Hara are still significant challenges today.
Okay, so this explains or tries to justify this inclusion, that the same way that skin diseases can spread, so too can slander spread. And unfortunately, you see that people will believe almost anything if enough people tell it to them. Rochelle.
I do appreciate the fact that in Judaism, when they did punish people, there had to be more than one witness. So because that was, I believe, to delineate someone just being slanderous and telling lies. Several people had to see this before a punishment could go down. So that is a good thing. They did react positively, in my opinion, to not convict people who are being lied about or just stories being told or what have not.
So that in Jewish law, this is done, but that still is going to make it hard to determine what people do on their own.
Well, yes, that's just a given. Unless you cut everybody's tongue out or their fingers off so they can't sign and write, there's never going to be a control of that. That's a self-control. We can only encourage, as the Bible has done, as people did apparently. You can only encourage these actions not take place, but it's within the individual.
Okay, any other final comments? So then back to you, Steve, and if Riva has anything to say, and if not, just back to you, Steve.
Riva, do you have anything, any announcements or anything? Okay. All right, interesting discussion. So let's keep our mouths closed unless we have something important and not slander anyone. Let us conclude with the Torah blessing after Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet b'chayei olam natan b'torah. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe,
Has given us
a teaching of truth, implanting within us eternal life. Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. Have a good rest of the week, everyone, and we'll see everyone soon.
Okay,
Be safe and
Stay well.
stay well.
Bye, everybody.
right. This has been the connection was so bad today.